Hello, and welcome to Shopping for Health. I'm Nancy Pyho, a registered dietitian and the director of the Shopping for Health Retail RD program. Today, I want to thank the American Beverage Association for sponsoring this webinar, Remember to Hydrate. A few quick notes, and then we'll jump right into our speaker presentation. Shopping for Health will be providing a certificate of attendance to all dietitians who complete this hour-long webinar. You can submit that certificate and the indicated learning codes to CDR and request 1 hour of continuing professional education time for participating today. And finally, remember that 2 retail RDs attending the session today will win a $50 Amazon gift card, just as a thank you for participating. These winners will be announced at the end of the webinar. And with that, I will turn the camera over to Diane Welland from ABA, who will introduce herself and today's speaker.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today's webinar. My name, as Nancy said, my name is Diane Welland. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also the Senior Director of Science and Regulatory Affairs for the American Beverage Association. And we call it ABA, and ABA is the National Trade Association for the Non-Alcoholic Beverage Industry. Our companies produce many of the growing array of products in the market that a lot of Americans choose for their hydration needs. We all know how essential hydration is for good health, and we also know that many Americans are unaware of this fact, and that many of you on the call are critical for informing consumers about the importance of hydration. So that's why I am so excited and pleased to bring before you Dr. Stavros Kavouras. Dr. Kavouras is a professor and assistant dean of graduate education for the College of Health Solutions at Arizona State University. He is the founding director of the Hydration Science Lab, which studies how water intake impacts health and performance. He's also recognized among the top 2% of the world's most cited scientists over the past 6 years. He's authored more than 170 peer-reviewed publications, which have been cited over 13,000 times, and is a popular guest lecturer, having given lectures in 31 different countries. His current research focuses on optimizing fluid composition for hydration and performance, hydration and thermoregulation, hydration in children, and the role of hydration in glucose regulation and cardiovascular health. He's a fellow at the National Academy of Kinesiology and the American College of Sports Medicine and the European College of Sports Science. Dr. Kavouras is also an elected member of the American Society of Nutrition and the American Physiological Society. So today he'll be reviewing for us the latest research on how chronic low fluid intake can affect the health of children and adults related to performance, aging, and long-term chronic illness. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Kavouras.
Thank you, Diane, for the very promising intro. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to pay more attention and hopefully remember to hydrate better. So before I start, I wanted to set the stage and clarify a couple of terms, because when we say water, there quite often gets very confusing, because we have water, what I say, water, the nutrient, versus water, the food. So the dietary guidelines for water intake are based on water, the nutrient. So the water molecule, which is everywhere in whatever we consume, most of it comes through beverages that, they're at least 88% water. And we also get water through solid food, like even a food that we don't think typically that there is water. Even meat has water. Obviously, fruits and vegetables are very rich in water. On the other side, we have water, the food, which is tap water or bottled water, which is, when we talk about water, people tend to think of plain water. But for the rest of this presentation and for the dietary guidelines and the adequacy conversation, when we talk about water, we talk water, the molecule, water, the nutrient, okay? So not specifically water as plain water. So as I said earlier, water there is everywhere. Most Americans, at least, we see that about 80% of total water intake comes from beverages, so whatever goes in a glass, whatever we drink, and roughly about 20% comes from vegetables. It would be really, really difficult to meet dietary guidelines if you're just trying to pay attention and eating a lot of fruits and vegetables alone. So one particular thing about hydration is that water and hydration are the least studied topics in nutrition science. And a little bit to show you some evidence on this is if you read, this is a series of 4 different papers that were published a little bit more than 20 years ago, actually, and trying to cover the history of nutrition science. So what do we know in nutrition about big milestone studies in nutrition, and starting from as far back as the 18th century all the way up to late 1985. And if you read those papers, you will notice that there is nearly nothing about nutrition and hydration or nutrition and water intake, other than the fact that we cannot hydrate just by drinking seawater, which is hopefully something that we know very well by now. So going into dietary guidelines, you will see that the dietary guidelines that were published a few years ago, and going back all the way to 1947, where we had the first dietary guidelines back in 1947, they were called the Basic Seven. And the Basic Seven was a simple way to show to Americans what we need to be strong. The message was eat the 7 every day. So different food groups. And then later on in 1956, we changed those to, in an effort to simplify a little bit of the message from the 7 groups to 4 groups, just to make it a little bit simpler. And then later on in 1992, we had the first version of the dietary pyramid. And the idea of the pyramid is that the base of the pyramid is what we consume more often. So you see breads and fruits and vegetables, a little bit less meat, and some protein sources. And then on the top, what we're supposed to use very little of it was fats, oils, and simplified added sugars. Later on in 2005, the pyramid remained. We had the mypyramid.gov, where the top to bottom type of pyramid became little slices, and all this side we also had physical activity as a critical component of daily health. So remember in 2005 when we looked carefully when the dietary guidelines came out, and for a second I thought there was water as part of this guidelines when I saw the glass, and then quickly I realized it was just milk and yogurt, so different dairies, but not a real glass or any type of beverage included outside of milk. So in 2011, I got super excited for about 3 seconds when I saw that circle, and I thought that was water. That was the first time that there was water in dietary guidelines. And Choose My Plate was alive for a long time until very early in January of 2026, were a way to simplify the message. It was looking at your plate that you're supposed to look for those 4 components of diet, and also have dairy during the day to cover your to increase your protein needs, and also have a good calcium source in your diet. So as you probably know, in 2026, a few months ago, we got the upside down pyramid or inverse pyramid, where also I look really quickly trying to see whether there was any water in this pyramid. And as you can see, there is also no water. So this is one of my long-term desire, and hopefully before I retire as a professor, I should be able to see the latest dietary guidelines with some beverage next to the other nutrients that they are very important. Last week we had the updated dietary guidelines that they came from the American Heart Association. And they came in I would say, some type of disagreement with the upside down pyramid, where there was a very heavy emphasis on meat, but not that much on fruits and vegetables And so they try to simplify a little bit the message on what to choose and what to avoid, what to minimize, I would say. So I read very carefully the whole document. I even do the search function in the PDF file, and I search for the word water or the word hydration, and both of them were missing actually from that document as well. So quite often I like to say that water is the forgotten nutrient. It's something that we forget even to study for a very long time, and definitely we forget to pay attention to it throughout the day. So a couple of facts about hydration. I wanted to make a little bit the comparison between fluid intake versus glucose, total glucose in our blood. So did you know that in our blood, if we take the entire content of sugar in our blood, we have less than 5 grams of sugar. So if you take the whole volume, you calculate what is the concentration, assuming that you have somewhere around 100 milligrams per DL. If you don't have diabetes, you don't have more than 5 grams of glucose. And we know that throughout the day that glucose ranges significantly. So it could be between, if you have normal fasting glucose, you're anywhere between 70 to 109, and from 110 to 125, we call it almost fasting normal. And if you have in any random blood sample anywhere between 70 to 200, we call it normal. Or you're not diagnosed for diabetes. So imagine this situation. You have only 5 grams of glucose in your blood. And that 5 grams can fluctuate so much. You can have as low as 70 or as high as 200 throughout the day. And we call that normal. So what I like to say, the paradox in fluid balance and in hydration is that even though we have so much water in our body, like we say roughly 50, 60, or sometimes higher percent of our body is made out of water, even a slight decrease in total water content, even 1%, can decrease performance. And if you reach 10 to 15% water deficit, this is the limit where people can die from dehydration. So it's really particular, and I think it emphasizes how important hydration is and how important water balance is, that the small change can really have such a big negative impact on not only on health, but also in our ability to survive. So the classic question that we get then, how does the body regulate body fluids? So there is a very complex system. We say that the main regulator is thirst. When we get thirsty, we drink, and seems to be okay when we drink according to thirst. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, I will convince you that thirst is not a very adequate signal. So thirst gets activated by 2 different signals. One of the signal, which is called the osmo signal, or activation of the osmoreceptors, that they measure different things. I would say primarily sodium content, and baroreceptors, and those are pressure receptors, that they measure how much water we have in our blood. When blood volume shrinks, because when we get dehydrated, we lose water, those sensors also get activated. So both of those receptors, they set signal to the brain, and the brain produces from the posterior pituitary this hormone, which is called antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin or arginine vasopressin, or AVP. This is the same hormone. And the main role of this hormone to decrease urination. So it decreases our urinary output. So this is the first line of defense. When we are not drinking adequate amount of fluid, our body increases antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin, and then our urine becomes smaller in volume, and urine becomes more concentrated or more yellow. There is also another mechanism which is a little bit more complex through the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system that controls sodium excretion through the urine. So the more concentrated the urine becomes, then we also produce more aldosterone, and that increases the reabsorption of sodium. So we're trying to hold on sodium in our body. So we hold sodium, we hold water, try to maintain body water in our system. So how much should we drink? So let's go through the National Academy of Medicine that they were actually originally developed by the Institute of Medicine at the time in 2004 and published in 2005. This is the table of the National Academy of Medicine. Those are not RDA, they're reference values, so they're DRIs. And let's concentrate primarily on adults. So for adult women and men, this volumes in ml per day is 2.7 liters per day for women and 3.7 liters per day for men. So this volume, again, it refers to the water as a nutrient. So this is the total amount. So the 2.7 and the 3.7. If we consider that most people consume about 80% of their total water molecules through fluids, that brings this volume down to 2.1 liters and 3 liters for women and men, respectively. So if we divide that by, one glass, that glass, or what we call a cup, this is approximately eight ounces of water for women and 12 glasses for men. This is the equivalent of 2 liters and 3 liters, roughly. Even though most people they don't even own 8 ounces glasses at home, most of them are much bigger and quite often I would say 10 or 12 or even larger glasses. So when we say how many glasses per day, just keep in mind that consumers don't think the same way that a dietitian will think about what is a cup and what is 8 ounces glass. So the big question that I often get, how much people really drink? So I show you what are the reference values, what are the guidelines. So let's see how much people really drink. So I picked for today's presentation two particular groups, older adults and kids. So if we look at data, they're a little bit older because we don't have more recent analysis based on, this were the 2005, 2010 dietary guidelines. I'm sorry, 2005, 2010 data based on the enhanced results. So the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. So the big advantage of this study is that we have representative samples for the United States. So we can speak to how much Americans consume. So we found that 64% of women and 96% of men do not meet the guidelines. And the deficit for the mean value is 2.5 cups below the recommendation for women and 5 cups below the recommendation for men. So definitely, I would say older adults do not really consume adequate amount of fluids. If we look at the data for kids, and those are data from 4 to 13-year-old kids, this bars, this is 4 to 8 years old, all of them together, 9 to 13 girls and boys. The total bar indicates the reference value, and the green bar represents the mean value of what kids consume. And this is the average deficit from 250 ml to 633 ml deficit on the average value per day. And in this pie chart, you can see that most of the kids, when we take all the 4 to 8 years old, 75% do not meet the DRIs for water. In higher ages, this number goes to 83 or 85% for boys and girls. So kids also are one of those category that majority of them do not meet the guidelines for DRIs. So if we look more particular, this is a little bit newer data, 2009, 2012 cohorts, again from NHANES. Some interesting thing is more than 50% of children are underhydrated, and I will explain a little bit more the term of underhydration and what it means based on urinary biomarkers. And 1 in 4 kids, they don't report any plain water consumption. So 1 in 4 kids, they report that they do not drink plain water. They don't like the taste of plain water. So their water intake needs are covered from other beverages, mostly from other beverages, juices, milk, and teas and other beverages. And of course, water coming from solid food as well. So we did a systematic review of the literature, and we summarized back in 2019, so about 7 years ago, based on all publications that we can find in the literature, and we found that 60% of children do not meet the guidelines, and that range was from 10 to 98%, depends on the country and different cohorts. And we also found 4 out of the 13 studies indicated that their urine was, the urine concentration was over 800 millimole per kilogram urine osmolality, which is nearly to the maximum kidney capacity to concentrate urine. This is a very high level of urine concentration, indicating that their kidneys is trying very hard to maintain water homeostasis. I wanted to share a couple of studies actually that we have done in my lab over the years, looking at um, either assessing hydration in children or trying to improve their hydration through different interventions. So in this study, we worked with kids that they participated over the summer in stay in summer camp. So kids that they will stay in that summer camp for a few days. So we will go there, and in one group, we will do the control intervention. I will explain in a second what was the control intervention. And in the other group, 61 children, we did the experimental intervention where we tried to increase their awareness for hydration, and we also increase fluid availability throughout the camp, and we did a couple things to improve their fluid intake. So what we found, more than 90% of children had urine osmolality greater than 700 millimole, with, according of the American College of Sports Medicine, if you want to be well hydrated, you're supposed to be definitely below 700 millimoles to be able to start at least your practice well hydrated. Those were relatively young kids. The age group was from 10 to 16 years old. The average age was around 13 to 14. So what we did in these children, we did a performance test at the beginning. We make them run 600 meters. We did the sprint, they did a vertical jump, and some other skill test. We did an intervention that was, we gave them a lecture, a simplified lecture for children on hydration. We use urine color charts that you might have seen, giving them the message that darker urine indicates that you're not adequately hydrated. We improve water accessibility in the camp, and we also use body scales for kids to check their body weight before and after their practices. We were not there to write down the numbers and type of like supervise the kids, what is your body weight, rather for them to see how much weight they lose during a practice. And that will indicate how much water pretty much you lose. The change in 1 or 2 hours of playing soccer or playing volleyball, it's pretty much an indication of water loss. So in the control group, we didn't do any of those. The only thing that we did in the control group, we gave them a lecture about hydration and the importance of this, and we also improved accessibility in water. So what we found, this is the urine osmolality of children. It was nearly to 1,000 osmolality in the control group and the intervention group. Post the intervention, we found no differences in the control group. We found a significant decrease in urine osmolality in the experimental group. And then we look at their endurance in running just in 1 day intervention, 600 meters. So we found when we improve water intake, then as a result, that indicated faster ability to complete the 600 meters. So they were able to complete the run faster, significantly faster. So we also did another study. Again, we used that model of summer camps in the different groups of kids. We had close to 100 kids. This is the number, this is a frequency diagram looking at urine-specific gravity, which is a different marker of urine marker of hydration. And this is the line that indicates that below that, you're well hydrated, you start your day well. And it doesn't take a big statistician to interpret this data. You see that most of the kids, they leave above this cutoff point of what it is considered well hydration. And most of the kids, they were like in really high levels of urine specific gravity. We also what we did, we went during one of their practices and we took their body weight before and after their practice. And we tried to correlate what was their morning hydration state based on urine specific gravity and how much water they lost during the practice. We were hypothesizing the kids that they will start with more concentrated urine, they might get thirsty faster and they might end up drinking more fluids during their break because they did have at libitum access to fluids. And unfortunately, actually, this is what we found. We found that whether you started with urine specific gravity very high or whether you started with low urine specific gravity, most of the kids, they lost more water weight. And also there was no statistically significant trend. So it didn't matter where you started from. You still lost more fluid. So even if you started, I would say, suboptimally hydrated, then you end up losing more fluids and making your condition even worse during the practice. So waiting for kids to drink based on thirst, I think it doesn't really work that much. It doesn't make you stay better hydrated. We did also another study, more of a descriptive study, trying to see what kids, how much fluid kids lose when they do their own practice. So this is a group of kids, roughly about 60 kids from different sports. Most of those kids were high level, very competitive children uh, with average age around 14 to 15 years old. And what we measure was primarily we were looking at how much water they lose during a practice. So we did pre to post body weights, we did other assessments as well. But I wanted to concentrate in this column right here, which is change in body weight, the column on your right. So if you pay attention, the highest percent water loss was in gymnastics, a sport that it was close to 2% of body weight. And it's interesting in gymnastics, someone would think that when you do gymnastics, it's not like running that you do prolonged running sessions or playing a basketball game, etc., that you have less breaks or less ability to consume fluids. Gymnastics would be the type of event that you have many breaks and you can really have access and drink fluids ad libitum. And even though that was our hypothesis, we found gymnastics to be the activity that resulted in the highest water loss throughout just a regular practice. So are people really dehydrated or are people chronically dehydrated, which is more of an important topic? And I would say some people are. So athletes, they get transiently dehydrated. They do a hard practice, especially if they exercise in a hot environment. Older adults might be chronically dehydrated because they do have physiologically documented suppression of thirst. We know that with aging, your thirst perception declines, and that's why we see such a high percent of older adults not to meet the dietary guidelines. We know manual workers, especially if you work in the heat. I live in Phoenix. We had, believe it or not, in March, you might have heard it in the news, we had the day with 105 degrees Fahrenheit in March. This days it's a little bit cooler, but you know how it is summer in Phoenix. We usually get 100 degrees almost every day. So these people that they do, I don't know, roofers and agriculture workers and landscapers, they really get exposed to high heat very often, and it's really difficult for them to recover from day to day heat exposure and manual work. Another category that we tend to forget is some medications like SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac, antidepressants. Those suppress thirst, and by suppressing thirst, people drink less fluids. GLP-1 arrays, the Ozempic and the family of Ozempic and these medications that they are not going away anytime soon. They have also documented that they, other than suppressing appetite, they also suppress thirst and people drink less. There is some data in experimental animals and some in humans indicating that that can result in dehydration. So those specific categories, I think those are categories of people that they probably get often dehydrated, but most of people are not really clinically what we call clinical dehydration. They're not clinically dehydrated that they need to seek medical assistance. But instead, many people are what I like to call underhydrated. This is a condition which is, in my head, I try to compare it a little bit as diabetes and pre-diabetes, like the equivalent of diabetes being the clinical dehydration and the pre-diabetes being the underhydration. So if you look in this diagram, the green area is the zone of euhydration where you're well hydrated. And obviously, this fluctuates throughout the day. You wake up in the morning, you might have, I don't know, a juice with your breakfast and you get some fluids and then you forget to drink and the level goes down, and then you drink something with lunch and then it goes down. Or you have a workout in the afternoon and then you dip into underhydration and even in the dehydrating zone during the practice, and then you come back. So underhydration, this is the zone in between being optimally hydrated or euhydrated and dehydrated. And this condition is characterized by concentrated urine. You're not drinking adequate amount of fluid. Your total body weight is probably restored to a greater extent. But the important thing is that you're not thirsty. If you take a blood sample and you measure clinical biomarkers of hydration like plasma sodium or plasma osmolality, are probably not changed much and they are within the normal physiological range, but your body has started defending your water sources, and your vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone is already elevated. And this elevated vasopressin, it leads to concentrated urine and protects you from losing extra fluids. So the question that I'm trying to answer is, at what cost of this elevated antidiuretic or vasopressin hormone comes when you have chronically elevated this hormone because your body is trying to keep the amount of water that your body needs. So let's look a little bit into the story of underhydration. So underhydration is the situation that your osmoreceptors and baroreceptors are probably activated. So your vasopressin is there. So you have higher levels of vasopressin. You have concentrated urine, but you're not thirsty yet. So you're not feeling the urge. Your body knows that you need more fluids, but it doesn't let you know that you should drink more fluids. So let me show you the explanation, the scientific explanation why this thing happens. So if we take the plasma osmolality, which is one of the main drivers for stimulation of antidiuretic hormone, we see that there is a linear relationship between plasma osmolality and vasopressin. So the higher the plasma osmolality, the higher the vasopressin. If we do the same for thirst, if we plot osmolality with thirst, we also know that, the higher the osmolality, the thirstier you get. If we overlap those two curves together in the same diagram, you will notice very quickly that there is a delay in what we call the threshold of stimulation of vasopressin versus thirst. So as you lose fluids, as you're not drinking, your body stimulates vasopressin almost immediately. So vasopressin goes up, but you don't get thirsty until you really reach a higher deficit of water. So this is how your body is made. It's made to delay the stimulation of thirst. And this is done because drinking water is a motivated behavior, and it's able to weigh the needs for water against competitive survival demands. So being a little bit dehydrated, it's not the end of the world, but you need to do survival things. You need to cultivate the earth. You have to hunt to bring food for your family. We are designed with this genes that they allow us to survive in fairly difficult environments. So let's see, who are these people that they're not drinking much fluid. So this is an interesting study. They took 250 subjects and they identified the 100 subjects that they were either high drinkers, drinking a lot of fluids, or low drinkers, drinking very little fluids. And what they found that the high drinkers, versus the low drinkers, the main difference is that the low drinkers had chronically elevated antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin, and they also had actually chronically elevated cortisol, which is something I don't really have time to go into that and discuss the mechanism, how this thing happened, but both of those were evidence. So let's see what happened if you're a small drinker. This is a epidemiological study from Australia. Giovanni Stripoli was the first author looking at fluid intake and chronic disease. So what he found is that if your fluid intake was on the higher level, like the one here, close to median value around 3 liters per day, this is total water intake, you had a protective effect on chronic kidney disease compared to the low fluid intake that was 1.7 liters per day. Then we did another study looking urine osmolality as an index of hydration, and we correlate this with your risk of crystallizing or creating calcium oxalate stones. And we use what is called the crystallization index, what is called the Tiselius crystallization index. And we found actually some interesting cutoff points that if your urine is for females above 500 millimole per kilogram or over 570 for men, you're high risk of crystallizing kidney stones. So those were patients that they had a history of urolithiasis, so patients that are prone to develop kidney stones. So if you have concentrated urine, so if your urine is more concentrated than around 500, maybe 570, then you're higher risk in developing kidney stones again. We also did, we look in the literature, this is one of the first studies trying to associate low water intake with hyperglycemia. This is a very interesting study. A little bit more than 3,500 adults, they followed them for 9 years, and they found that low water intake was inversely and independently associated with the risk of hyperglycemia. So drinking low water intake led to higher risk of developing hyperglycemia or high blood glucose. We did a study with patients with type 2 diabetes, and we test them twice in the lab. We did an oral glucose tolerance test, and we found that when they were slightly hypohydrated, so we manipulate the water intake for a few days, we found that they had not only worse ability to regulate glucose, but they also had higher levels of cortisol. And you can see those with the dark squares in the diagram. Their blood cortisol remained significantly higher during the oral glucose tolerance test just by drinking less water. So your body activates through ACTH, activates a stress response that keeps your cortisol elevated. What is also interesting that a few years ago, from a large cohort from Sweden, they measured copeptin, which is a surrogate marker for vasopressin, and they said that higher levels of copeptin or arginine vasopressin leads to a 3 to 4 times higher risk for diabetes, and which is equally strong for the risk of diabetes. So if you look back in the same diagram that I was showing you earlier, the vasopressin and thirst stimulation, when you're in this zone in between the thresholds where your body has high levels of vasopressin, but you're not thirsty, the levels of vasopressin, they run very close to these thresholds that we see to be associated with risk of developing diabetes. I know mice don't look like us that much, but this is a very interesting model, and they did this magnificent studies a few years ago. A group from France where they took mice, they test them before, they measure fasting glycemia, the blood glucose levels during fasting, and then for 2 and 4 weeks, they kept injecting them with antidiuretic hormone, or in the white, the blue data is the vasopressin ingestion. Let me see if I can do that. So this data right here, this one's here, and this one's right here, are the data of vasopressin injection. And the Y data right here, those are data on high water intake. So they immerse their food in water, so they end up drinking more water when they had to eat their food. They found that if you inject somebody with antidiuretic hormone for 2 weeks, you start developing hyperglycemia. And if you drink more water, your blood fasting glucose goes down. So they also did another experiment. They took in the same paper, they took what is called the Zucker obese diabetic rats, and they did a glycemic test. So they inject them with glucose and they look how their body handles glucose. And then after they, in another group of animals, what they did while they were doing the same experiment, they use a vasopressin receptor blocker. So they gave a drug that blocks the action of the antidiuretic hormone. And they found just by blocking the action of vasopressin in their liver, they were able to have lower glycemic response and lower insulin response in their blood. They also took biopsies of the liver. They found that they could reverse hepatic steatosis or fatty liver disease in mice. And I know I say mice and rats, they're not humans, but they really show mechanistically that if you block the action of this hormone, specifically in the liver, for instance, you can have much better glucose regulation. We also did a study with, it was a clinical trial with 60 subjects. We brought them in. We did stimulation of vasopressin with hypertonic saline infusion. And we kept these people in the lab for several hours. And we found when they have high levels of antidiuretic hormone, their blood glucose was significantly higher and their blood insulin was a little bit delayed, indicating that your body doesn't regulate glucose optimally when you have higher levels of vasopressin. So being chronically underhydrating and having higher levels of vasopressin, you don't set your body up for success. And it seems that this effect, the high vasopressin effect, seems to be driven primarily by higher levels of glucagon because antidiuretic hormone stimulates glucagon. So looking into the literature, there are many other studies actually that have been published the last few years showing that even a small degree of dehydration can impact things like the mood. So your mood, and primarily in women, it seems to have a strong effect on having worse mood. There are data on endothelial function and cardiovascular health associated with dehydration, and also having slightly higher serum sodium within the normal range. So not being hypernatremic clinically, not being clinically dehydrated, but having just slightly higher level within the normal range. It seems to be associated with accelerated biological aging, chronic disease, and premature mortality. This is a study published from NIH, from the Institute of Blood, Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute in Bethesda in NIH. We did an analysis in the enhanced data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and we found that underhydration to be associated with obesity, chronic disease, and even death. So the last few years, there are more and more data indicating that being underhydrated, actually, it's not a good thing. I know for survival is a good thing, and you can survive because you have other priorities to make it. But long-term optimal health, we see more and more data linking underhydration with chronic disease, cardiovascular, diabetes, dementia, longevity, and the list goes on. Even things like social behavior that technically we don't try to associate. We don't think of associating how much water you drink and what is your social behavior and the risk taking and things like that. So for sake of time, I would like to jump a little bit through this data, and I would like to close with a hydration tip. So we did a study, we published it in 2021. Try to identify a simple way to assess hydration. So we came up with combining these two very simple self-assessment tools. Number one, how often you go to the bathroom, how often you urinate, And number two, how dark is your urine? So if your urine is lighter in color, and if you go to the bathroom at least 6 to 7 times per day, so in simple terms, every 2 to 3 hours, uh, during the hours that you're awake, then it's almost 100% certain. This is the sensitivity. It's 100% when you combine those two things that you're very well hydrated. So this is a simple way. Uh, if somebody asks for something simple that you don't need to collect urine samples and do analysis or take a blood sample and assess biomarkers. So I would like to thank my group in the Hydration Science Lab at Arizona State University that they do all this magnificent work so I can create presentations like this and share their very hard work. And I will close with the simple message. Why optimal hydration is a simple and economic way to improve health.
Thank you, Dr. Kavouras, for your insights and for that very, very interesting and exciting new science on hydration. So, and I also want to thank all the attendees for taking part in the webinar. And I know that here at ABA, we understand the role that hydration plays. It is so important and especially related to public health, as you mentioned, all the different ways that hydration can affect the body. So related to the American Beverage Association, for about 20 years now, the beverage companies have been innovating to offer consumers more choices with less sugar and zero sugar. And during those 2 decades, the beverage aisle has been transformed due to customer demand, but also as well as product innovation. I wanted to just put up these two websites for the attendees as a resource for more information. I also have my email there as well if there's any questions afterwards. I also wanted to say that now there is more in the beverage aisle. There's more than 400 brands of beverages that have no sugar, and that list includes a number of different types of products: waters, sparkling waters, flavored waters, pro and prebiotic waters. Also includes low and no calorie versions of old favorites. But today, about 60% of the beverages that Americans buy now have zero sugar, and that's very much different from what it was in the past. So I do want to get to questions, and I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to just kind of hand that over to Stavros to see if there's any questions that we can answer. Nancy, I know you have some.
I do. Thank you so much, Dr. Kavouras. That was a fascinating presentation, and we do have some questions that have come in. So if you or Diane could take these, we would appreciate it. First of all, first question, have you seen any impact on blood glucose management for type 1 diabetes with good hydration versus underhydration?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there is the study that I mentioned, I guess, is one of them, showing that if you're well hydrated, your ability to regulate your glucose, it's optimized. It's a little bit better. Obviously, we're not going to treat type 1 or type 2 diabetes just by drinking more fluids, just to be transparent. But in the complexity of a disease, especially something like type 2 diabetes, there are many, many different factors. There is one of the paradigms that we know, it's what is called the omnious octet. So the 8 different factors that they impact the long-term development of diabetes. And I can see hydration playing a role in multiple of them. So one of them is through glucagon. Some people have, glucagon is the opposite hormone of insulin. And what glucagon does, it stimulates when we need it. It's a very useful hormone. It stimulates when we become hypoglycemic, stimulates the liver to produce glucose. So you break down glycogen from the liver, you produce free glucose, so you can maintain this very small amount of glucose that we typically have in our blood. So one thing that we have seen in several studies is when you are underhydrated, your body has, for some unreasonable reason, has higher levels of glucagon, and that higher levels of glucagon produces more glucose in the blood. So for some reason, your body is pushing more glucose when you're underhydrated. And it seems to be associated to the higher levels of antidiuretic hormone. So the antidiuretic hormone produces more glucagon, and more glucagon pushes more glucose in the blood. So we tend to see chronically higher levels of glucose.
Thank you. Second question, how does the current surge in interest in creatine impact hydration? What is creatine's impact on hydration for the body?
Yeah, this is a good question. There is little literature on whether there is any synergistic as far as health effects. We know that creatine has an osmotic effect, and creatine increases intracellular hydration to a small extent. When people take creatine, they usually gain, depends on your body size, maybe 2 to 3 to 4, maybe up to 5 pounds when you start taking creatine, which is primarily more water inside the cells. Creatine seems to be one of those wonder supplements that they started many years ago as a supplement for gym goers and muscle guys going to the gym. And now we see that creatine seems to have a positive effect on brain function, on even breast cancer, and on and a variety of other stuff. So we don't really know exactly whether there could be a synergistic effect as far as creatine and better health outcomes related to hydration, but I think it's something very interesting to study and examine, I guess.
Okay. Next question, is more better? If you are currently adequately hydrated, is there benefit to getting even more?
Not really, actually. If you're well hydrated, it's not a race, okay? We're not trying to break a record every day, drink more water. This is not the uh, like every nutrient, and I view water, the molecule of fluid, as a nutrient. Your body needs a certain amount. So whether you drink double the dietary guidelines, you're not going to have any extra benefit. Some of the slides that I skipped, actually, for sake of time, just to make sure we have enough time to address questions, they were on a condition which is called overhydration, which is, to be quite honest, it's quite rare to happen. It doesn't happen easily. When you drink too much, you go to the bathroom too much. I mentioned going 6 to 7 times per day. It seems if your urine is light color and you're going 6 to 7 times per day, that seems to be what your body needs. If you're going to the bathroom every 20 minutes, you're overdoing it. Slow down. You don't have to leave next to the restroom. So that can give you a good indication. Your body has regulatory mechanisms to get rid of the excess water. The potentially dangerous thing of overhydration, or what is called dilutional hyponatremia, it's something that has been observed in marathon races and longer events. But just for you to give you an idea, I know it can happen. It is very, very rare to happen. Okay. It's not like you're going to have 2 extra glasses of fluids and then you're going to be taken to the hospital to treat hyponatremia. This is not happening like this. Your body has a large capacity. Your body can excrete as much as close to 2 liters or 64 ounces of urine per hour. So if you drink too much, you'll be peeing too much. But for the case of marathons, there was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine with around 700 subjects, and they found the runners that they were higher risk of developing hyponatremia were the ones that they gain as part of over drinking during a marathon race 7 to 12 pounds of weight. So imagine you run a 4 hours marathon or 5 hours marathon and you gain 10 pounds. Can you conceptualize this? You're running and you're sweating in the meantime. So how much are you drinking to be able to have this massive over storage of water to be able to dilute your plasma sodium to start having severe hyponatremia that could be asymptomatic? So So you really have to try to do something like that. It's not something that you drink, I don't know, 2 extra glasses of water and like, oh my God, I'm going to get hyponatremia.
Right. Okay. And this next question is slightly related to that. How does the concept of hydration differ when referring to an occasion, for example, exercising, that leads to acute need for hydration versus hydration in the context of achieving adequate fluid intake every day?
Yes, with exercise, like many things change with exercise. If you take most of the time, people get the extreme cases. So you have a football player who is 350 pounds, who's exercising 4 hours per day in the heat, and these people can sweat as much as, I don't know, 2 or 3 liters, half a gallon of sweat per hour. And then they could be losing, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 grams of sodium in their sweat per day alone. So these people do have different dietary guidelines. They need to pay attention to balance their sodium. They have to take potentially sodium supplement or salt their food much more. They have different needs in everything, in calories, in protein, and carbohydrates, and everything. So remember, the dietary guidelines are guidelines at population level. Most people do not practice 4 hours per day. Most people are not 400 pounds. Most people are not out in the heat, 4 or 5 hours per day. So at population levels, those guidelines seems to be adequate in keeping us well hydrated. If you're super active, depends on how active you are, you have different needs. And the optimal way to hydrate for elite athletes, and they have very, their focus is elite performance, is we develop what is called individualized hydration protocol to make sure we max out their ability to hydrate well and stay hydrated during a race to have optimal performance.
Well, thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and the American Beverage Association for sponsoring this fantastic webinar. This was just wonderful information. Again, I want to remind everyone it will be posted to the Shopping for Health website, so you can review to your heart's content to get all the information to see again. I want to announce quickly the winners of the 2 gift certificates are let's see, Christine Clifford from Hy-Vee and Lorena from HEB. So I'll be in touch with both of you separately. Diane, thank you again. Any closing remarks from you on resources or anything you want to add from ABA?
The resources are on the website. On the website, and I gave you the links. And if anyone has any questions, again, you can reach out to me. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming to this webinar and listening to all this fascinating new research. So I'm sure there'll be new things coming out in the future.
Thank you so much on behalf of Shopping for Health. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.